meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 124 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking part in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of our meeting. I'd like to remind all witnesses and all of the members here to wait until I recognize them by name. And for those members, should you have any technical challenges or any questions, please do raise your hand if you're joining us virtually. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 19th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of Canada's advancement of a two-state solution. Before we do welcome our witnesses, I wanted to say, as you will note, our old clerk is back. So great to have you back, Ms. Widmer. I know I speak on behalf of everyone when we say we're very, very happy to see you here today. So that having been said, we're very, very grateful to have two witnesses for the first 35 minutes. We're grateful to have Mr. Eugene Kontorovich, who is the director for the Center for the Middle East and International Law, as well as Mr. Elon Levy, who's the former spokesman for the Israeli government. So we will start with Mr. Kontorovich. You will have 5 minutes, sir, after which we will go to Mr. Levy, and then we will open it to questions from the members. I should warn you beforehand, since you're joining us virtually, if you do see this going up, that means you should be wrapping it up within 30 seconds, because we have a tight schedule here, and we want to make sure that people don't go over the allotted time. So all of that having been explained, Mr. Kontorovich, the floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Mr. Kontorovich, you're still on mute. If you'd like to start.
There we go. Sorry. Chairman El Aksasi, Vice Chairman Kong and Bergensen, honorable members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on this important subject. I'm a professor of international law and have extensively written scholarship on legal aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The focus of today's discussion is proposals that Canada imminently recognize Palestine as a sovereign state. Such a decision would lack any basis in international law and add Canada to a lamentable trend of nations subordinating legal norms in state recognition to political considerations. Recognizing a Palestinian state would undermine Canada's commitment to the integrity of a, quote, rules-based international order. That is because the existence or non-existence of sovereign states is a matter governed by international law, and the suggested recognition would not comport with the relevant rules. The legal criteria for statehood are set out in the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. They are fourfold. The entity must exercise effective and independent governmental control. The entity must possess a defined territory over which it exercises that control. The entity must have the capacity to freely engage in foreign relations, and the entity must be an effective and have control over a permanent population. The Palestinian entity does not meet several of these criteria. To give just a few examples, and you can refer to my written brief for more details, the Palestinian Authority, the government, was created by bilateral agreements with Israel and possesses only those powers specifically transferred to it. Those can include control of only parts of the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority controls no part of Gaza, having been evicted by a different government, Hamas, in 2006. In short, there currently does not exist a Palestinian state under the objective criteria of international law. Canada knows this to be true, having officially declared on September 14th, 2024, that it, quote, supports the creation of a Palestinian state. Supports the creation of a Palestinian state. This demonstrates that the government of Canada knows that no Palestinian state existed a month ago, otherwise it would not need to be created. And nothing since then has changed. That Palestine did not qualify as a state a month ago, it does not now. International law does not regard recognition as creating statehood. Rather, statehood must already exist on the ground. That is why Canada does not recognize the statehood of numerous national independence movements, many of whom have suffered massive oppression and have worthy historical claims. Recognition is not related to the justness of Palestinian national aspirations or the extent of their suffering. Surely this committee would not be prepared to minimize or downplay the suffering of the Kurdish people, or the Sikh people, or the Uyghur people. But that does not mean that there exists under international law a sovereign state of Kurdistan, or Khalistan, or East Turkmenistan. Some might argue that other countries have recognized a Palestinian state, claiming it would advance the peace process. But that was just a smokescreen. Have any of these actions brought peace closer? Have they reduced Palestinian support for Hamas, which is at over 70% in the West Bank, according to Palestinian opinion polls? Has it moderated the Fatah party, whose president Mahmoud Abbas publicly mourned the demise of mass murderer Sinwar and has himself not held an election in 15 years? Has it ended the Palestinian Authority's pay-for-slay policy or helped free a single hostage? If anything, Palestinian stances have hardened because they see their international recognition strategy as an outside path to getting their demands without changing their behavior. Can strengthening Hamas, an Iranian puppet, be consistent with Canada's goal of achieving a, quote, independent and, quote, democratic Palestinian state? Recognition in the current climate sends a message to Hamas that all of its goals, including the eventual elimination of Israel, can be achieved through vicious attacks, followed by the extensive and illegal use of their own people as human shields. Why do the people of Taiwan and Somaliland, who have peaceful functioning governments, fail to get recognition, and the Fatah and Hamas-ruled Palestinians achieve it? What message does this send to, say, Sikh nationalists or any other kind of ethnic separatists, that their failure to achieve their diplomatic goals comes solely from a lack of violence? How can one look them in the eye after this? Considerations of international law and the promotion of Canada's...
My apologies, Mr. Kontravoit. You've hit the 5-minute mark. If you could wrap up in 30 seconds, please.
Absolutely. Considerations of international law and the promotion of Canada's stated interests in democracy and peace demonstrate that the recognition of a Palestinian state would be a grave mistake for Canada. It is completely understandable that many members of this House and this committee feel that more should be done to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. But recognition is not it. It does nothing for the Palestinian people while rewarding their most criminal leaders. Thank you for your time.
Very much for that, Mr. Kontorovich. We will now go to Mr. Levy. Mr. Levy, you similarly have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Standing Committee for the opportunity to speak. I was an Israeli government spokesman for the first 6 months of the October 7th war, and now I speak to you in a private capacity in the hope of encouraging our ally Canada to avoid steps that would be destructive to the cause of peace. Most Palestinians believe that the October 7th massacre was a good idea, and they believe it was a good idea because the world has rewarded them for it. According to regular polling, a large majority of Palestinians believe that the October 7th massacre was the correct decision by the government of Gaza, Hamas, and that's because they believe it has taken their national cause forward. They see nations like Norway, Ireland, and Spain unilaterally recognizing statehood, and they conclude entirely rationally that terrorism works. Now, terrorism works might not be the message that well-meaning lawmakers want to send to the Palestinians, but it is the message they are receiving. Palestinians see that Hamas's genocidal violence on October 7th triggered waves of protests calling for the violent destruction of Israel. They see it leads to more money for UNRWA, a Hamas front, and they conclude rationally that barbaric atrocities are the way to mobilize international opinion to their national cause. The elimination of Israel, as protesters here in Canada are chanting from the river to the sea. Now, I understand there are demands for Canada to recognize the state of Palestine outside of a peace settlement with Israel, following the barbaric atrocities of October 7th. That would be a terrible mistake. When Norway, Ireland, and Spain took that step, they were effectively telling Palestinians, burn more Jewish families alive, and we will reward you. I'm confident that none of the honourable members of this committee would wish to encourage the Palestinians to take hostages again, like Canadian citizen Judith Weinstein, whose body is still held hostage, and they would in fact be horrified to think that that would be the consequence of such an action. But that is exactly what unilateral recognition would do, and that incentive must be avoided at all costs. The underlying cause of the conflict remains that Israel is surrounded by enemies that wish to destroy it. The Palestinian National Movement remains committed to an ideology of a forever war against Israel until it achieves its goal of no Jewish state anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I would challenge the committee members to find any Palestinian speaker who would embrace a vision of two states for two peoples. And the Palestinian movement is backed by an Iranian regime that has surrounded Israel with a ring of fire, arming proxy armies to wage war on 7 fronts, and would seek to exploit any further vacuum to continue its attacks on Israel. Now, the challenge for policymakers is to strengthen voices that seek peace by accepting Israel's permanent existence and the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their ancient homeland. And currently, international practice is empowering those who are committed to waging a forever war against the Jewish state. World leaders must aim to induce the Palestinians to abandon that forever war against Israel. That means, for example, ending the farce of UNRWA. UNRWA openly employs terrorists who took part in the October 7th massacre, using Canadian taxpayer money. It indoctrinates Palestinian children to glorify martyrdom. Since UNRWA educates most of Gaza's children, it is a fact that most of the October 7th terrorists went to Canadian-funded schools. That is an appalling indictment of Canadian foreign policy. UNRWA also tells Palestinians that they are entitled to welfare at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer until they achieve their vision of no more Israel. And Canadian funding to this Hamas front therefore discourages Palestinians from reconciling with Israel's permanent existence, pushing hopes of peace further away. I'll point out another way that Canadian foreign policy has pushed away prospects of a two-state solution. Israelis are now scarred by the failures of past withdrawals. In 2000, we left southern Lebanon and we got Hezbollah. In 2005, we left Gaza and we got Hamas. Israelis have every reason to think that a further withdrawal from the West Bank would lead to the creation of another Iranian puppet state committed to Israel's ultimate destruction. And Israelis have learned the hard way, while Palestinians are chanting from the river to the sea, that we cannot afford to give them from the river to 9 miles away from the sea so they can sprint the remaining distance. Canada's failure to fully back Israel's neutralization of the terrorist armies that filled the vacuums created by its own withdrawals has taught Israelis that if they take risks for peace, they will be on their own and the world will expect them to tolerate these threats on their borders. Any future settlement and any future Palestinian state must therefore be predicated on full Israeli security control west of the Jordan to avoid its takeover as an Iranian client state. I'll say in conclusion, if Canada wishes to play a constructive role towards a two-state solution, then it needs to create a pathway towards peace. That pathway runs through Palestinian de-radicalization. It means conditioning any change in the international status of the Palestinian Authority on an embrace of peace and acceptance of Israel, on stopping funding for agencies that support and encourage and incentivize a forever war against Israel, and it means giving Israel its full backing to eliminate all and any threats from territory that it vacates under pressure. The Palestinians must not be allowed to look back at October 7th as a national holiday.
Mr. Levy, I apologize for interrupting. If you could just wrap it up in the next 20 seconds.
And this is my concluding sentence. The Palestinians must not be allowed to look back on October 7th as a national holiday, and that is exactly what states pursuing unilateral recognition are encouraging them to do.
Very much, Mr. Levy. So for the first round, each member will have 3 minutes, but I really will cut everyone off at the 3-minute mark. Mr. Chong, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. We heard at our last committee meeting about the support, current support, historical support for a two-state solution in the region. My view is that, there can be no lasting and durable peace in the Middle East unless there is a negotiated settlement between Israelis and Palestinians that results in that two-state solution, and that also has the popular support of both Israelis and Palestinians. So I'm interested in exploring the historical levels of support in the state of Israel among the Palestinian people for a two-state solution and the present levels of support. So I'm wondering if our witnesses could speak to that fact. There, as I as I understand, there's about 9.8 million Israeli citizens. Wondering what the levels of support there have been historically for a two-state solution, what the levels are presently. There are approximately 5 million residents of the West Bank and Gaza Strip who are Palestinian. I'm wondering how historically levels of support have varied for a two-state solution amongst that second population.
That question's for Mr.
For both, yeah.
Mr. Levy? Mr. Levy, you're on mute. You can start over.
Thank you, sir, for your question. Support in Israel for a two-state solution has fallen over the years, and especially since October 7th. Part of the reason is that on October 7th, Hamas murdered many of the supporters of a two-state solution. Many of the victims of the massacre were peace activists who would drive Palestinian children to hospitals in Israel, and they were burned alive on October 7th. Israelis have unfortunately come to the conclusion that any territorial withdrawal would lead to the creation of another Iranian puppet state, and that a withdrawal, far from advancing the cause of peace, would in fact serve as a possibility for the Palestinians to use a springboard towards their ultimate goal of the destruction of the State of Israel. And when you see even so-called moderate leaders on the Palestinian side saying that Hamas is an integral part of the Palestinian movement, and if there were elections, they would gladly cede control to Hamas, and mourning the death of Yahya Sinwar, all of their behavior has convinced Israelis that on the other side we do not have a partner for peace, because their ultimate goal is the destruction of the State of Israel, and that any concessions would in fact be exploited to advance that ultimate goal of the destruction of the State of Israel, and would push peace further away rather than bringing it forward. And so I would hope...
Thank you, Mr. Levy. I'm afraid we're out of time. So now we will go to MP El Gabra. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for joining us this afternoon, or wherever your time zone you're in. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Kutrovic. Question for you. Do you believe that Palestinians have an inalienable right to self-determination?
Thank you for the question. Every people has a right to self-determination. However, so as do the Sikhs, as do the Kurds, as do the Somalilanders, as do people around the world. In international law, the right to self-determination does not amount to a right to statehood, which is why there are far fewer states than there are in self-determination.
I appreciate. I just have a limited time, so I appreciate that. And the examples you keep using, those are succession examples where there are competing claims for statehood. I'm curious, what do you think the your legal opinion of settlements in the West Bank?
My legal opinion of settlements in the West Bank is that there is no international law that forbids members of a particular ethnic group from living in a particular territory as a virtue of their ethnicity.
Thank you. Mr. Levy, I have a couple of questions for you. In July, the Knesset voted overwhelmingly against or rejected the idea of an establishment or the creation of a Palestinian state. What do you think about that motion?
I think that it is easy to forget that only 20 years ago, Israelis voted for a party that promised a unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank if necessary to define Israel's borders. And the experience since has scarred them, because it has led Israelis to the conclusion that any territorial concessions to the Palestinians would mean more rockets, would mean more death squads of the style of October 7th.
So my question to you, sorry, Mr. Levy, I have limited time and I don't mean to interrupt you, I apologize,
Sure.
but do you support a two-state solution? Because that resolution does not support a two-state solution.
I would say that at present, the conditions do not exist for that sort of resolution of the conflict. And if we were to ensure that a two-state solution would solve the conflict rather than aggravate it, that pathway to peace has to run through the de-radicalization of Palestinian society and their acceptance of the permanent existence of the State of Israel. But as long as the Palestinian national movement remains committed to the ultimate demise of the State of Israel and would appear likely to become an Iranian client state, a two-state solution would aggravate the conflict in the Middle East and would be against everyone's
Thank you,
interests.
Mr. Levy. I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn to our next member. Mr. Bergeron, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
J'ai entendu un certain nombre
I heard a certain number of comments that surprised me,
que
particularly
la Palestine n'aurait pas droit
that Palestine is not entitled to international recognition because it doesn't exercise any control over its populations.
pour avoir eu l'occasion de visiter la Palestine.
Having visited Israel and Palestine several times, particularly in the early 2000s, I was able to observe that Israel systematically undertook to destroy
Les postes de police,
the police stations, the port, the airport, and all the infrastructure that would make it possible to have an effective control over the territory rather than attacking
à ce qui semble être son
what
objectif.
appears to be its objective, namely the terrorist movements. I heard Mr. Kontorovich say that the recognition of Palestine by a number of states around the world had not changed anything. So can you say whether since 1967 the occupation made it possible to arrive at peace and security in the region? To ask the question is to answer it. In fact, it only increases the resentment and despair,
Comme je pense
as I think
le font
is the case
de destruction,
of the destructive operations that are currently underway in Gaza.
même si Israël
Even
parvenait
if
à
Israel
éradiquer le
were to be able to eliminate Hamas,
alimente
Israel is feeding into the concept of Hamas
en sorte
by arranging it so that
sentiment de la
they cause resentment in the Palestinian population. Two questions.
On insiste sur le fait que
It is emphasized that no agreement can be, or no recognition can be given without having an agreement following direct negotiations. However, on the one hand, there is no negotiation, and secondly, Israel declares that it does not want to negotiate anything. And the second thing is, it is stated that recognizing the Palestinian state would be an encouragement to Hamas, which, however, does not wish for a two-state solution. So how do you reconcile those statements that are at least contradictory?
Okay. Yeah, let me respond to that. So thank you so much for the questions. Hamas seeks to advance political pressure on Israel. Hamas leaders have been quoted in the New York Times after October 7th saying they believe that their attack was an extraordinary success. Khalil al-Hayya, a senior Hamas official in Doha, said that as a result of October 7th, we succeeded in putting the Palestinian national issue on the table. That's why it's a success. And that is why they do not. They continue to not release the hostages.
Thank you, Mr. Kontorovich. I'm afraid we're out of time. We next go to MP McPherson. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This morning I met with Iris Weinstein, daughter of Judy Weinstein, a Canadian who was a resident of Kibbutz Nir Oz. She and her husband were murdered by Hamas on October 7th, and their bodies remain in Hamas captivity. Judy Weinstein volunteered with peace groups, helping Palestinians in Gaza access health care in Israel. She worked with Jewish and Palestinian children by teaching them mindfulness, which helped build resilience when surrounded by violence. We New Democrats want all hostages returned, including the remains of Judy Weinstein, a Canadian and an Israeli, who believed in doing her part to build peace and work across borders. Judy believed in a two-state solution. And as I think of Judy, I also think of other peace builders in Israel. I think of Standing Together, who have organized thousands of Israelis and Palestinians to march in the streets to call for a ceasefire, a hostage deal, and an end to Israel's war in Gaza. I think of Gil Murciano, CEO of Mitvim, who says, for years we used to talk about wars of no choice, but now after October 7th, it is time to shift the conversation. We must talk about a peace of no choice. There are so many Israelis who are ready to do the work for peace and who are supported by the many members of the Jewish community in Canada, including through the New Israel Fund. We know that Netanyahu and his extremist government and its supporters are not here for peace or for a two-state solution. We know that there are loud voices crying out for more violence, more death, more war. We want to hear from those voices who offer hope. And when I think of Judy Weinstein, who grew mangoes and peanuts, wrote poetry for peace, I also think of the Palestinian families in the West Bank who grow olives and who also see land as life, who for generations have gone to their olive groves to harvest the olives that symbolize their hard work, their livelihood, and their love of Palestine. Palestinian olive farmers dream of harvesting their olives in peace, but extremist settlers in the West Bank, emboldened by the extremist Netanyahu government and enabled by Israeli soldiers, are attacking Palestinians on their own land, burning their olive groves, cutting down their trees. As we sit here today listening to apologists for an extremist government that is continuing a genocide in Gaza, trying to annex Palestinian land in both Gaza and the West Bank, and make a two-state solution impossible, we need to ask ourselves, not just as the Foreign Affairs Committee, but as Canadians, what we stand for. Hamas and Sinwar did not want a two-state solution. Netanyahu and his extremists do not want a two-state solution. Our job is to find a pathway to peace. Our job is to learn from peace builders, not warmongers, not those who defend atrocities. This must end. It is time for Canada to do the hard work to build that peace. It should start today with the recognition of Palestine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we next go to MP Abeltaif. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make it quick. Seems like on both sides, no one wants two-state solutions. It's very, very unfortunate. Before October 7, was the two-state solution feasible? And what has changed after October 7? The question to Mr. Levy and to the second witness.
Thank you, sir, for your question. I would argue that at present there are two dynamics that mitigate against the prospect of a two-state reality leading to peace. The first is profound radicalization on the Palestinian side, the commitment to the destruction of the state of Israel from the river to the sea. And indeed, I see when protesters on the streets of Canada are chanting from the river to the sea, there are no Palestinian speakers who correct them and say that that is not in fact their goal. And the second is the exploitation of any power vacuum in the Middle East by the Iranian axis in order to fill it with proxy armies with which to attack Israel. I would say October 7th has exacerbated those two problems because it has brought to the fore, one, the depth of the Palestinian extremism problem, that even many Israelis who had previously supported a two-state solution have been turned against it as a result of October 7th because they realized the extremism problem was worse than they had grasped. And the second is the understanding of just how high the risks are of territory being taken over by the Iranian axis. And let's remember, Israel is not as large as Canada. This would leave Israel only 9 miles wide at its narrowest point. So I would say October 7th has shone a light on the negative trends that existed before, that have crystallized an understanding among many Israelis about why a two-state solution without the containment of the Iranian regime and without Palestinian de-radicalization and acceptance of Israel's existence would only push peace further away rather than bringing it forward as we would all like to see.
Do you believe in Oslo framework? Yes or no?
I'm afraid, Mr. Abeltaif, you're out of time. I'm sorry, it's 2 minutes. So we next go to Dr. Fry. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that the object of this study is to find out how we can get to a two-state solution, not whether we should. So I want to say to the witnesses that this is not what we're here to talk about. Canada has long for decades, actually sought a two-state solution. So have many countries. So whether you think it's fair or not is not the issue. How does one get there is the question we want to ask. Canada has always supported a two-state solution, and Canada is basically saying, how do we do this in keeping with international law and international fairness and international justice? And so I would like to ask you, it's obvious that neither of you support a two-state solution. I'm not going to ask you that. I would like to ask you how we can get to that position, right? Because generations of Palestinian and Jewish children are growing up in a place where they have no dreams and no hope. Let's get to a solution, move forward. Can you tell me how we can do that? And please only stick to that. Thank you. I will go to Mr. Kontorovich, who obviously has his hand up, but please remember, I don't have a lot of time. I don't want long answers. I want simple answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I have said nothing, I think, when you review the record against a two-state solution.
I don't want you to, please answer my question.
Yes, the de-radicalization of the Palestinians to reduce their support from Hamas from maybe over 70% to less than half would be very helpful. And that means not rewarding Hamas. That means not funding UNRWA, which teaches Palestinians to hate and despise Israel and to see no role for Israel in the world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I just want you to note that actually Hamas does not want a two-state solution either. So Israel doesn't, Hamas doesn't. So can Mr. Levy tell me how we can get there?
Dr. Fry, I'm afraid your 2 minutes are up.
Thank you.
So next we go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 1 minute, sir. Okay. Madam McPherson, you have a minute remaining. No? Okay. So at this juncture, I'd like to thank our two witnesses. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Kontorovich and Mr. Levy. Grateful for your perspective and for kindly appearing before our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we're going to suspend for 3 minutes, and then we're going to move on to the next panel. We will resume our hearing, and we now go to the second panel. We're grateful to have with us here Professor Musso from the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs from the University of Ottawa. We also have here before us today Mr. Peter Larson, who's the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel and Palestine. And also, lastly, we're very grateful to have Professor Waxman, who is the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Professor of Israeli Studies at UCLA. So we'll start off with Professor Musso. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. I would ask that you look over, because if anyone sees this this sign, that means you really should be wrapping it up within 20 seconds. So, Professor Musso, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I would start with one statement, opposition, that I believe that there is no other solution than a two-state solution. As a, this would be a statement of opening, but I would also like to try to answer a question. I've listened to the other testimonies that you've received today and on Tuesday. And what I would like to do in these few minutes is to actually try and answer the question of why are we talking about whether Canada should recognize Palestine or not, and where does this idea that the recognition of Palestine should only come as a result of negotiations? It's kind of an important question to ask before we actually say, well, it is time to change our position. How did we get there? So I would start from a step back. Of course, this idea of the two states is not dated 1947. It actually predates the UN declaration. It dated really already from the 30s. The Peel Commission in the 30s proposed two states. It was different two states, but the original idea predates both World War II and the Holocaust. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, after the first Arab-Israeli War, ultimately, Israel did not control the West Bank, and Gaza was not on the borders of the 181 declaration, but rather was on what we have now come to call the Green Line. And basically from 1949 until 1967, the West Bank was controlled by Jordan and Gaza was controlled by Egypt. Jordan annexed the West Bank. Egypt did not annex the West Bank. The annexation by Jordan was not recognized internationally other than by the UK, at least from an administrative point of view, and by Pakistan. While Egypt kept the Gaza Strip as essentially mostly a refugee area and did not give Egyptian citizenship to the Palestinians, while Jordan did, which is why so many Palestinians still have Jordanian citizenship. Now, the question is that once Israel got control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, in 1967, originally did not plan to keep this control. So it is important to remember why are we today in this position. The plan and the strategic priority of the State of Israel was actually that of bilateral negotiation with other sovereign states in the region and reciprocal recognition. We've seen that in 1979 with Camp David. We've seen that in 1994 with Jordan. And when to wrap up, I'm aware of the time, when the Oslo Agreement took place and what we call the Israeli-Palestinian rather than the Israeli-Arab peace process started, there was a lot of road to still be made. I would argue that the priorities of Israel were actually not with the Palestinian issue, but much more with establishing itself in the region. So the reason why there was so much hesitation for what by now already a couple of decades to immediately recognize a Palestinian state is because this final status negotiation was so complex to address. Reciprocal trust had to be built, and immediately recognizing Palestine when the parties were so far apart, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization had just transitioned from being essentially more an activist or even defined as a terrorist organization by some, to being the official representative of the Palestinian people, well, then it was quite understandable that this would be a precaution. I would say that now the question to ask, and I believe this is the question that you're all reflecting, are the conditions on the ground different? Is there now a reason to actually change that policy and think that this can be done
Professor
before the rest?
Musso, if I
Yes.
could ask that you wrap it up.
And the answer is?
I'll give
in
you
the
another-
questions. In the questions.
Thank you very much for that. We now go to Mr. Larson. Mr. Larson, welcome. You similarly have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Monsieur le Président, je vais faire mon cours possible.
Chair, I'll do my best. I wish to thank the members of the committee for welcoming me here today.
I'm honored to share the same platform as a number of your distinguished witnesses preceding me, including people like Professor Artie Emsis and former Canadian Ambassador to Israel, John Allen. My organization, OFIP, endorses Ambassador Allen's view, as reported in the press, saying that recognizing a Palestinian state is about sending a message of hope and commitment to Palestinians and sending a clear message to Israel and others that simply managing the conflict, Israel's policy for the last 17 years, is not an option and never was. I would add that Canada's recognition of Palestinian statehood would enhance the ability of Palestinians to advance their rights internationally, supporting them as they seek representation and justice in international forums. It would send a message more broadly to the global South that Canada exercises its sovereignty by supporting international law without fear or favor, whether applied to friend or foe. OFIP believes that Canada's former position of agreeing to the idea of a Palestinian state only after it has reached agreement with the State of Israel was untenable. To draw a parallel to Canadian domestic policy, it was kind of like supporting a woman's right to divorce as long as her husband agreed. We are encouraged by Minister Jolie's new formulation, issued a month ago, that Canada reserves the right to recognize the state of Palestine at the right time, and we believe the right time is now. Many would argue that the recognition of the state of Palestine is merely a symbolic act because Palestine does not have the powers of a state. That's true. Today, the government of Palestine doesn't control its own borders, its own water, its own airspace, or its own telecommunications. It does not have an airport, and its only seaport is under blockade. Israel exerts complete control over the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, in defiance of several UN resolutions. However, recognizing states which are not yet in control of their territory has many precedents. During World War II, many Western countries recognized governments in exile from countries under Nazi occupation. Recognizing Palestine, however, is not only symbolic. If Canada recognizes Palestine, this must have concrete repercussions. Among these are a revision of the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, Canadian support for full membership of Palestine in the UN, full support for Palestine's right to use international institutions, including the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. Canada's recognition of the state of Palestine should be without prejudice to the outcome of any future negotiations between the parties. A future solution to the Israel-Palestine issue might be a two-state solution. It could be a fusion to create a single state, or it could be some kind of confederation. Canada should prioritize urgent action in support of human rights and freedom. Canada should focus not on endless negotiations about a two-state solution, but on the urgent need to protect Palestinian rights. Canada should join the over 130 countries in the world today, including several European allies, that officially recognize the state of Palestine without delay. Thank you very much, Monsieur Dam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Larson. We now turn to Professor Waxman. Welcome, Professor Waxman. I understand you're joining us from California. You're a few hours behind. That's correct. So welcome, and you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Standing Committee for the opportunity to talk with you today about Canada's advancement of a two-state solution. Let me begin by saying that I continue to believe that a two-state solution remains the best means for bringing peace through both Israelis and Palestinians, and the terrible bloodshed and tragedy over the past year, I think, underscores the urgent need to bring peace to both peoples. I think we also have to recognize today that the two-state solution is more endangered today, more at risk today than it has ever been before. The possibility of a two-state solution is diminishing day by day, and unless, I think, significant action is taken, it will soon disappear altogether. I believe the most important action that Canada could take to save a two-state solution is to recognize the state of Palestine, as Spain, Norway, and Ireland, of course, have already done earlier this year, and as just over 75% of the UN members have done. Now, some argue that recognition of Palestinian statehood would be an empty gesture. On the contrary, I think if Canada were to recognize a Palestinian state, it would make Canada's recognition of the Palestinian right to self-determination and Canada's support for a two-state solution not merely empty rhetoric. Recognition would be a tangible step that Canada can take to help Palestinians achieve their long-standing quest for national self-determination. Recognition of a Palestinian state at this point in time would help keep the possibility of a two-state solution alive. And I think there is a real danger that this possibility will soon disappear. If Palestinians don't achieve statehood soon, they will, and I think surveys show, likely give up on support for a Palestinian state and increasingly demand equal rights in a one-state framework, as younger Palestinians are already doing. And if that becomes the Palestinian norm, then rather than the pursuit of statehood, there will be a very long and I think decades-long struggle for equal rights within a single state. Recognition of a Palestinian state would also boost Palestinian support for a two-state solution and save the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, of course, is established under the Oslo Accords as an interim step toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. It has essentially lost its legitimacy among the Palestinian public, and I think it could well collapse in the next few years, forcing Israel to take over complete responsibility for the West Bank. And so recognizing a Palestinian state, I think, would really help boost the legitimacy of a reformed Palestinian Authority, and I want to emphasize that in the eyes of the Palestinian public. It would also, of course, increase diplomatic pressure on Israel to end its illegal occupation of Palestinian territories and its ongoing settlement activity there. And the stationing of international diplomats in the West Bank could also increase scrutiny of Israel's actions in the West Bank. I want to emphasize that recognizing a Palestinian state is not an alternative to peace talks. On the contrary, I think it's a means to help peace talks succeed. Ultimately, the only solution to the conflict lies in a negotiated solution. But in order to reach such a solution, I think we need to ensure that the prospects for a negotiation are more likely to succeed. And recognizing Palestinian statehood would help do that. It would help to put it on an equal par with Israel so that it would be negotiations between two states, the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. Now, you've already heard earlier today the claim that recognition of Palestinian statehood would be a reward for Hamas's terrorism. But this completely ignores the fact that Hamas does not support a two-state solution. Hamas does not want a Palestinian state alongside Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of Israel. And so I think, on the contrary to the speakers earlier today, that in fact recognizing Palestinian statehood would actually undermine and weaken support for Hamas by showing Palestinians that there is an alternative path, a non-violent path, a diplomatic path to help them achieve their legitimate rights. And finally, I would say, contrary to the claim that some may make that now is not the time to recognize Palestinian state and that we should wait. I think, in fact, waiting is only going to make the situation worse. Support for a two-state solution is declining day by day. Conditions on the ground, in particular in the West Bank, are continuing to deteriorate after what we've witnessed over the past year and what we particularly saw on October the 7th, it is very clear that managing this conflict, going along with the usual means, is not working, and it's not bringing safety to Israelis, and it's not bringing rights or security for Palestinians. So I think what's urgently needed is bold action to save a two-state solution, and I think this is the best action that Canada could take in the near term to help achieve and create the conditions for a successful two-state solution. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Professor Waxman. We now go to the members for their questions. Mr. Chong, you start off. You have 5 minutes, but I do undertake to cut everyone off at the 5 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Professor Waxman, just building off his opening statement. What territory would this state have? Would it include all of the West Bank as delineated traditionally by the 1968 borders or not? And secondly, who would be citizens of this state? Would include the some 2 million Israeli Arabs? And three, and other Palestinians who are in Jordan and elsewhere. And three, what entity would be considered the government of that state?
Professor Waxman, before you do respond, if I could just ask you to move up your mic. I've heard from the technicians we're having a bit of a hard time picking it up for translation. Thank you kindly.
Okay, so thank you very much for those questions, very important questions. First of all, on the question of borders, I think the recognition of a Palestinian state should be within the June 4th lines, the lines that existed before the 1967 war, in other words, within the Green Line. But that doesn't preclude the negotiation of final borders between the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. Ultimately, the final borders of a Palestinian state, as the final borders of the state of Israel, have to be negotiated between the two sides. But I do think the recognition should be within the June 4, 1967 lines. On the question of citizens, I think ultimately, clearly, it is up to the state of Palestine to decide its citizenship policies as a sovereign state. But I think we should be very careful about assuming somehow that Israel's Palestinian citizens, citizens of Israel who are Palestinian Arab, would be future citizens of such a state. Most have said quite clearly that they wish to remain citizens of the state of Israel, and I think their citizenship should remain in Israel. But of course, they may well have or be granted dual citizenship by the state of Palestine if they wish to do so, if they wish to claim that dual citizenship, and if the state of Palestine were to grant it. And in terms of the government, there is already a government, a quasi-government functioning in the West Bank. That is, of course, the Palestinian Authority, which, as I mentioned, was established under the Oslo Accords. I do think that recognition of Palestinian statehood should be linked with reforms undertaken by the Palestinian Authority, particularly democratic reforms, like ensuring the judicial reform. But ultimately, we have the kind of embryonic Palestinian government already in existence. That government needs to be given greater legitimacy, and I think affording it statehood would give it that legitimacy and enable it to govern not only the West Bank, but also ultimately the Gaza Strip as well.
Okay. I would like to ask a second question of Professor Muzu, but as well as you, Professor Waxman. You both hinted at declining support for a two-state solution on both sides of this conflict, and I'd like you to describe what the levels are of support for two-state solution, both amongst Palestinians and amongst Israelis.
Sure. Shall I go first? Okay, yeah. So I believe the latest polls that I've seen of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza put support for a two-state solution around 40%, which is actually an uptick lately. It went down and it declined to around a third of Palestinians, but lately it's gone up to about 40%. But among Israeli Jews, it's only around 21%. So actually there's much higher support currently. But it's important when we look at levels of public support for a two-state solution, a lot of that support depends upon whether they believe a two-state solution is feasible. In other words, when you ask, do you support a two-state solution? In many ways, what they're responding to is whether they believe such a solution is possible. And I think the major reason why support has declined declined over time, it's not because they're opposed to one in principle on either side, but rather because they've come to the conclusion that the other side isn't interested in such a solution.
Okay.
That's why they're.
Thank you. Professor Muzu?
I would quite agree with my colleague. The question is very much framed as it is not possible. We've heard this from the previous speakers as well, that there is that kind of persuasion that has built since the withdrawal from Lebanon, or Lebanon brought us Hezbollah and then Hamas in Gaza. So this has built up, and we shouldn't forget that in Israel, after multiple Netanyahu governments, the idea that it's possible to create a peaceful state in Palestine has really thinned out to nothing. So I think the question answer is not the one that you're asking when people are polled.
Thank you. So now we go to MP Chattel. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all our witnesses to this committee.
Je vais m'adresser à Madame Muzu.
I'll address this to Professor Muzu, if you will allow. Your research has explored relations between Canada and the U.S. and also with the European allies concerning this conflict precisely. And my question to you is, how could Canada draw on those partnerships, because we're close to the United States, we're close to Europe, in order to try to support some significant advances toward a two-state solution? In your opinion, how could Canada specifically, with its alliances and with the United States and European countries, how could we achieve that? Thank you very much for the question. I will answer in English because it's easier for me, but thank you.
I would premise that the role that Canada can have and has had in the peace process has been, by necessity, quite limited, in the sense that Canada has been able to contribute at different times to the peace process, as gavel holder of the refugee working group and in other occasions. But as you mentioned, my research, I think this have not necessarily been the priorities for Canada. A lot of the priorities has been how to place the Middle East policy in the context of alliances. And this is why I was suggesting to kind of go back and think a little bit about why did we ever agree in Canada to this idea of waiting to recognize Palestine, and is there something that now can suggest a departure from that original position? It is not unknown for Canada to depart from its previous alliances. It's done so on a number of occasions. Obviously, the priority, well, let's say the dominating factor here is, would the recognition of a Palestinian state possibly, I'll be quite blunt, hurt our relations with the United States in the context in which the United States does not support the particular step. I think we are a little bit at the crossroad here in deciding what are the priorities and what kind of contribution this kind of recognition would give to the peace process. I do think that at this stage, given the situation on the ground, a recognition of a Palestinian state, not coupled with any other initiative to actually further the process, will mostly be symbolic and have relatively little impact on the ground. So I think there should be a little bit more than just that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And I see that I have little time left, but Mr. Waxman, you stated that recognition of a Palestinian state could strengthen the two-state solution, as you mentioned. But can you speak more specifically about the results we could expect if Canada were to take the measure of recognizing the Palestinian state and the impacts, the positive impacts on Israeli policy and also on the regional dynamics? You mentioned earlier that it could result in a status on an equal footing with Palestine in order to undertake those negotiations that are important. But above that, are there any more concrete results?
Thank you for your question. In some ways, I think recognition of a Palestinian state at this point in time is a preventive measure. It's about providing Palestinians with another option, one that is not represented by Hamas's armed resistance, showing that they can achieve an end to their occupation and achieve their national rights through diplomacy. And that would in turn, I think, not only boost Palestinian support for a two-state solution, thereby making a resumption of a peace process more likely in the future, but also boosting legitimacy for the Palestinian Authority. And I think we have to really take seriously the possibility, as many have been warning, of a collapse of the Palestinian Authority in the near future without boosting its legitimacy. I would also say, though, that if and when negotiations were to take place, having negotiations between two equal parties, two states, rather than, as has been the case in the past, between a state and a people that is not a state, increases the likelihood of success. It gives the state of Palestine more leverage in peace talks, more legitimacy, and it puts more pressure on Israel to end the occupation.
Thank you, Professor Waxman. We now go to Monsieur Bergeron. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I wish to thank our witnesses for being with us and for giving us their observations. Some of you, I believe, have answered the argument that others are trying to advance, according to which the low degree of support for a two-state solution, both in Palestine and in Israel, ought to prevent recognition of the Palestinian state by the Canadian government. However, what we hear from your testimony is that, on the contrary, recognition of Palestine by Canada could increase support, both in Palestine and even in Israel, for a two-state solution. And I find that this is something which is eminently bringing hope, and I believe an argument that goes along the lines of such a recognition. Our colleague, Dr. Fry, stated earlier that the objective of the study is not so much to know whether it's appropriate to recognize Palestine, but rather when. And my colleague, Ms. McPherson, often repeated that the government could recognize Palestine as of now, to the extent that some consider the process we're in now to be a kind of an ultimate, final, dilatory discussion to try to postpone what should be done now. And my question for the three witnesses is, do you believe that this is the appropriate time, because the government has said to wait for the appropriate moment, but never defined the appropriate time for recognition of Palestine? In your opinion, is it the appropriate time? Let's start with Mr. Larson, who hasn't had a chance to answer any questions as yet. Yes, it is the appropriate time. Why so? Why wait? What logic? The government has to understand the situation that we're facing now. It's very difficult to find a Palestinian who wishes for a two-state solution. There are many Palestinians that will accept it, but what they wish for is something else. Find a Palestinian that doesn't think that Jaffa and Haifa are not part of Palestine. When I come to the Ben Gurion airport, it says in English and in Hebrew, "Welcome to Israel." But when the Palestinians began to recognize the airport, they said, "Welcome in Palestine." So in the case of any Palestinian, Jaffa, Beersheba, Haifa, they are still part of Palestine. So I think that it's been a long time that we should recognize that the more we wait, the more there's frustration.
It is not a great moment in the sense that the timing coming on, following October 7 opens the move to a lot of questions. And, I think that is problematic. the fact itself, the idea itself of supporting the two-state solution, however, which is enshrined in the Canadian policy, remains valid. So I do think that there is a problem with the timing in the sense that it does come really on the heels of something that opens up. Especially if it's done exclusively as a recognition, but no other action. The problem that I see is that in the past several years, the Palestinian question has been completely on the back burner for everyone. One could travel, as you might have done, you could travel to Israel and not at all know that there is a Palestinian question that needs to be resolved. Other issues where, so as someone who has observed this, you would think that would have been maybe a better time to really try to build. And now the confidence between the two parties is at an all-time low. This is why I said exclusive recognition without any other more substantial plan and move and concerted. It's a limited step.
Monsieur Waxman.
Thank you.
Mr. Waxman.
Well, I think in the century or
Waxman?
Yes.
15 seconds, no more. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I think now is exactly the right time, although obviously there are very difficult circumstances in Gaza, in the West Bank, and politically in Israel. I think it is really important for a significant initiative to be launched at this time. There's no prospect for a resumption of serious negotiations. And in the absence of that, taking the initiative and making it clear that Palestinian hopes can be realized in the form of a two-state solution would save that and counter the radicalization processes that are happening not only in the region but around the world as more and more people start to call for a one-state solution and believe that, and give up hope in a two-state solution. So I think actually this is past the right time.
Professor Waxman, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. MP McPherson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and sharing their expertise with us. I'm going to start with you, if I could, Mr. Waxman, or Professor Waxman. I appreciate what you said when you said the most important thing Canada could do to save the two-state solution is recognition of Palestine. I think that's something that's a vital piece of testimony. I'm also interested on the conversation that is happening in the United States right now regarding American arms sales to Israel. So, we've seen many experts wondering why the Biden administration is ignoring the Leahy law, which declares that the U.S. cannot arm human rights abusers. It's also similar to our Canadian legislation, which our government is also not respecting. We've called for an arms embargo. Well, this genocide continues. I'm wondering if you could talk about where the conversation is in the United States and why that is not being upheld.
Well, I think there's certainly been a growing criticism, both inside the Beltway in Washington and within the Democratic Party over the Biden administration's apparent unwillingness to uphold U.S. law with regards to arms sales. And there does seem to be some movement recently. There's about a few weeks ago, a letter was sent basically telling the Israeli government that unless they allowed more humanitarian aid in, there would be a restriction of arms sales. Clearly, things are shifting. Clearly, I think the conversation is shifting to start thinking about imposing restrictions on U.S. military aid to Israel. I don't think President Biden is, and he's made it very clear that he's not willing to countenance that. But I think if there's a different administration, if there's a Harris administration, I think you will see more willingness to do that. I think more broadly, there is a recognition that there needs to be some fundamental changes in the U.S. approach to this conflict. And I think even that includes considering recognition of a Palestinian state as well.
Thank you. And I guess that comes to my next question. I am very curious. The whole world, of course, is watching the United States next week as you do have your presidential elections. I will be in Milwaukee as part of an observation mission. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the impacts of this conflict have on the election, what you can tell us about what this might mean for the future of the Middle East, how the Middle East-U.S. relationship could potentially change. We're going through something similar in Canada, and I'd like your perspective.
Well, I think we're really at a pivot point in terms of U.S. policy. If there is a Trump administration, it's quite clear that I think Trump administration would give Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government a green light to do whatever they want. He's already talking about wrapping up the war in Gaza very quickly, but I think that might well be followed by support for Israeli annexation measures in the West Bank, as well as potentially annexing parts of the Gaza Strip, which again underlines the need for making it very clear of where the international community stands and making it very clear that that Israeli annexation of the West Bank would be illegal and unacceptable. Conversely, I think a Harris administration is likely to depart somewhat. I don't think there's going to be a radical shift from the Biden administration's approach, but clearly there is a recognition that the approach that the Biden administration, however well-meaning, the approach that it's taken has failed. I mean, for many months now, the Biden administration has put its hopes in a resumption in achieving a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, followed by a resumption of negotiations, tying that with the possibility of normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia and a broader agreement between the United States and the Saudis. Were that possible, were that on the cards, I would be less forceful in advocating for a recognition of Palestinian state. But I don't think that's going to happen. It's very clear that this government in Israel is not interested in a Palestinian state and is certainly not interested in a resumption of peace talks. So I think it's really important, given the fact that the U.S. policy is currently very much in flux, not to wait for U.S. leadership. Certainly not to wait for the Trump administration, because they've made it very clear that they take no regard for international law, and I think would support the kind of far-right ambitions of the Israeli government. But I think it is important to signal to the Harris administration, were that to come into office, where the international community stands and where the United States allies stands. The Europeans are doing the same, and I think in the moment the United States could actually take heed and from its allies, and particularly from Canada.
Thank you very much. Do I have any more time?
Yes. You have 10 seconds.
I will
Apologies.
tack it on to my next round.
Absolutely. Fair enough. Now we go to Mr. Abel-Taif. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the witness for appearing today. Oslo Accord was probably the most time where both parties negotiated for something that I believe was the most advanced as far as to find a final solution for the conflict. Where do you see the Oslo Accord now? Do you see that people are walking from it, or it can still be the best framework to go back to start a serious negotiation towards something feasible and something that is going to solve the issue for once and for good?
Thank you very much for your question. It might surprise members of the committee to know that AVIS supports a one-state solution. This is the map I got about 8 years ago when I went to Israel to drive around. There's no indication of an occupied territory. It's all Israel. And Canada for years has allowed the conversation about a potential two-state negotiations to fester, so that now this is normalized in Israel. Very few Israelis believe this is all Israel. It's not a Palestinian territory. And we've allowed that to develop by not insisting on a two-state solution. So I think that we are partly culpable for the situation today where the idea of Palestinian statehood is very low in Israel.
Dr. Waxman?
So I think the most significant achievement of the Oslo Accords was to underline the legitimate rights and national aspirations of both peoples, that mutual recognition. And the most damaging development in recent years has been the reversal of that mutual recognition. Recently, a poll showed in a survey in Israel that now only around 30% of Israelis recognize the Palestinian right to statehood. So a lot of what was achieved at Oslo, and particularly that recognition, has been undermined and reversed over the years. The one remaining remnant, surviving remnant of the Oslo Accords is the Palestinian Authority. And that won't last forever. In order to kind of save the Palestinian Authority, which was meant to be that way station toward a Palestinian state, I think it's important to take action because otherwise the Palestinian Authority has no raison d'etre. There's no reason for the Palestinian Authority to survive in the eyes of Palestinians if it isn't on a pathway towards statehood. So in a sense, that is the last part of the Oslo Accords left standing, and that's what needs to be saved.
Mrs. Musso?
Say that for both sides, even the word Oslo has kind of become anathema in the sense that both sides have lived through a lot of disappointment from what was a really positive starting point. One of the main issues
Respond to that in the next round.
For sure.
Thank you, Professor Musso. My apologies for that. Next, we go to MP Oliphant. 3 minutes.
Chair, thank you, witnesses. Just to put my bias out on the table, for me, hope is perhaps the most important factor and powerful tool to end terrorism and to end militancy. And for me, two-state solution provides hope. And for me, it is necessary to have two states, to have a two-state solution. So if we want to end this conflict, to me, hope is absolutely critical. I also want to say that I don't believe there are two sides, as has been said in this meeting. I think there are many sides. And I want to raise the issue of we have governments, but we also have people and civil society organizations and many people who are working for solutions that are important to get to peace. My question is, and it's related to the fact that we are not talking about the world recognition of the state of Palestine. We're talking about Canada's recognition of, and we're a country that has some influence, but not a lot. Can you tell me why you think Canada's recognition of the state of Palestine could be helpful in the pursuit of peace? So not generic, Canada. Let's start with Professor Waxman, and then we'll go to the table.
Yes, I think it's important because as a member of G7 in particular, and as a leading Western country, it would lead the way among Western countries in affirming that recognition. And that's particularly important, not only for Palestinians to see that, but also at a time where around the world, because of the destruction and devastation in the Gaza Strip over the past year, Western policy, Western international law has really been called into question around the world. So I think it's very important, not only just for Canada's reputation and Canada living up to its commitment to support a two-state solution and its commitment to the Palestinian right to self-determination, but also to lead the way of Western countries, say, actually, we care.
Thank you. I just want to give Professor Larson a chance.
I completely concur with what he just said. I don't think new to add to that.
Professor Musu.
I think one of the things that could potentially be positive that comes from this is giving more support to the Palestinian Authority, because arguably one of the problems that the Palestinian Authority has had is that the support that it has received from the West has been more of a kiss of death because it's been seen as less than legitimate. So if that recognition comes, it can potentially also produce some kind of result for the Palestinian Authority to say, yes, well, we are supported by the West doesn't mean that we're puppets of the West. We're actually also advancing the cause of Palestinian independence.
Thank you all very much.
Mr. Bergeron, a minute and a half, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
In
1967, there were 1,900 colonists in the occupied territories. In 1997, there were 331,000. In 2005, in 2022, there were 741,000. In your opinion, Professor Waxman, what is the goal of colonizing the occupied territories?
Well, I think first and foremost, the goal is to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. I would distinguish between the Israeli government's goals over time, and obviously they vary from time to time under different governments. But generally speaking, to settle or to colonize in the heart of the West Bank the goal is to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. For the settlers themselves, they have a variety of goals, and obviously for the most religious Zionists among them, it is to ultimately bring about the coming of the Messiah. But I think the more secular goal is to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and allowing the ongoing settlement essentially is doing that. With every new settlement and with every additional settler, it makes the establishment of a Palestinian state that much harder.
Thank you. We now go to MP McPherson. I would remind you, you have a minute and 40 seconds.
A minute and 40 seconds. Let's go. All right. Well, Professor Larson, I have some questions for you with regards to the ICJ cases, both the case that on the illegality of the occupation, where the decision was granted on July 19th, and on the South African case on the plausible genocide in Gaza. Knowing those cases, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how Canada has responded to those two cases, and also what the recognition of the state of Palestine would mean going forward, considering those two potential cases.
Thank you very much. I consider that a set-up question because you know what I'm going to say. I think Canada's abstention on the ICJ decision on the occupation was appalling. I think our reputation around the world is going in the global south. We're maintaining our reputation with our U.S. allies and European allies, but I think the world is seeing this atrocious development, and Canada is not living up to our claimed support for international human rights and international humanitarian law.
You still have about 30 seconds, so if you could tell me what this could mean. If the recognition of state of Palestine, what would that mean? What would the obligations of Canada be then in that situation?
For example, if we recognize Palestine, and if Palestine were recognized at the United Nations as a member, Palestine would have standing at the ICJ, Palestine would have standing in other international organizations. Canada's recognition will not do that. Canada will be one more pebble on the balance of what's happening. We will be
talk about the trade agreements as well that we would be obligated to.
Well, obviously we would have to suspend or revisit our Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement. That would be obviously because we now recognize the state as Palestine. And so on.
We should do that already because of the ICJ. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Larson. We now go to MP Hoback. MP Hoback, you have 3 minutes, sir. Mr. Chong? MP Chong?
Yeah, I'll ask some questions. Thank you. I'd like, Professor Musa, you've expressed support for a two-state solution. You've also indicated that some nuance that it may not be constructive to immediately recognize a state of Palestine by the government of Canada. Could you maybe talk a bit more about what conditions do you think should be placed on the recognition of a state of Palestine in the current context?
This is a complicated question in the sense that attaching conditions to the recognition of a state, it's not unheard of. I mean, it's something that's been done multiple times. I think the reason I was being cautious is because while I do believe that the two-state solution is the only possible solution, and the reason I believe that is because I believe that Palestinian nationalism and Jewish nationalism are two sides of the same coin. They are both national movements that aspire to self-determination. And in that sense, a two-state solution is the only answer to that. I think what is unfortunate is the fact that we're having these conversations following October 7, which creates and opens up the doors to all these kind of objections on the motivation, on whether this makes a recognition look like a cave-in to terrorism, and why does that matter? If we know that we shouldn't, that Canada wants to recognize Palestine, we shouldn't really care about the fact that it's. Yep, sorry.
A second quick question. Canada's most important multilateral membership is the G7.
Yes.
I think most foreign policy experts would agree with that.
Yep.
What would be the impact if Canada became the first G7 country to unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine, and none of our other G7 members did the same?
I think we can expect that there would be some uncomfortable conversations to be had. It still has to be balanced on whether it is a worthy discomfort if Canada is following its own policy and making independent foreign policy decisions on a matter of importance for Canada. Discomfort is part of the G7 in general. So this is one more.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for the last question, we go to MP Zuberi. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today, both by Zoom and in person. My first question this study, first off, is about Canada's advancement of the two-state solution. Our country's position, long-standing position, is that we are here to realize a two-state solution because we support the two-state solution, and that's what this study is about. With respect to Mr. Waxman, you stated that it's important to recognize the state of Palestine now. Do you think that that recognition is contingent on the recognition from other countries if and when Canada were to go ahead with that recognition?
No, I do not. I don't believe Canada should wait for other countries. I do think other countries, including G7 members like Britain and France, are seriously considering taking this step at this time. So in that respect, Canada wouldn't be a complete outlier because this is even the Biden administration, actually, the State Department initiated a study. So I think it would be very much in accordance with this shift, but Canada would position itself in that respect as a leader, and I don't think it needs to solely wait until other countries are willing for their own domestic policy.
And you spoke about that previously as how Canada would be a leader. And to Mr. Larson, Professor Larson, can you also answer that question? Do you think is it our recognition contingent on any other country?
I think any serious political actor has to be very cautious about reactions of our trading partners, our international partners. That it would be foolish to plunge ahead without doing so. I think Canada should be trying to find like-minded countries to go ahead. We've made certain initiatives aligned with like-minded countries. I don't think anybody would seriously recommend an announcement tomorrow without any consultation with allies.
And you spoke about, witnesses spoke about our relationship with the Global South. Those are important allies to consider too, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think our G7 allies are important, but there is a growing movement of the Global South. The BRICS is not an inconsiderable development, and we need to be careful as we move forward to maintain our reputation for human rights and international law.
Thank you. And to Mr. Waxman, do you think that state recognition, the state of Palestine recognition, would help to end the war that is currently happening and bring peace back to the region?
Very briefly, Professor Waxman, 30 seconds or less.
Sadly, I don't think in the near term it would end the war in Gaza, certainly not while the current Israeli government is in power. But I do think it would be a significant contribution toward achieving peace in the region. That's not going to happen overnight. That is the goal, and I think this would be a significant and important step to take that would help us move in that direction rather than further away from it, as we've seen over the past year.
Moving in the right direction. Thank you so much.
That concludes the questions. Professor Musu, Professor Larson, Professor Waxman, thank you ever so much for your time and for your perspective. I know I speak on behalf of all members here when I thank you for having appeared before our committee.
Thank you.
The meeting stands adjourned.